Hello and welcome to Everybody Has a Story with Jeff Seltzer. I am your host, Jeff Seltzer. If you listen or watch every week, thank you so much. It really, really means a lot to me, and I appreciate it. If you're new to the pod, thank you so much for giving it a shot and checking it out. I think you'll have a lot of fun and enjoy the ride on this journey that we're going on. If you want to tell me what you think about the show, or if you want to be a guest on a future episode, check out Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. Send us a DM, leave a comment, whatever works for you. Reach out, let us know. Additionally, you can email us directly at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. You can check out my personal Instagram at Seltzer77. You can check out all things Jeff Seltzer at jeffseltzer.com. A few things I want to go over before introducing our guest for the week. So firstly, for those of you that aren't aware or didn't see it on social media about a week and a half ago, this podcast, Everybody Has a Story with Jeff Seltzer, now officially has an IMDb page. Super exciting stuff. For those of you that aren't aware, IMDb stands for the Internet Movie Database. So you can go to the website and find out anything you want about pretty much any actor, any actress, any TV show, movie, any kind of media for the most part. So if you went in and typed in Ryan Reynolds, it would tell you everything about his bio, any show he's ever been in, movie he's ever been in, things like that. Or if you typed in, I don't know, Back to the Future Part 1, it'll show you who was in the movie, any trivia about the movie, any connections, things like that. So taking a step back, years ago, back in the mid-90s when I was in college, IMDb.com was one of the first websites that I ever went to. And it was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed just the fact that, I had all this information at my fingertips about any movie or TV show that I've ever seen before. Nowadays, it's probably not as exciting because, everyone's got cell phones and all sorts of stuff. But back then, the internet was still pretty new. So just getting all that information in one place was really cool. Now, fast forward into today, being that Everybody Has a Story with Jeff Seltzer is a podcast and is, I guess, technically considered media, I was able to set up a website or set up an IMDb page for this podcast, which is super cool. So along with having a IMDb page for this podcast, I then was able to set up an IMDb page for myself, which for me is super, super cool. It's kind of a bucket list item that I didn't even realize that I had previously. So I was able to set up the podcast, then I was able to set up myself, and then I was able to set up every single episode the show's ever had, going backwards and then going forwards. I will continue to. Cool thing about that, anybody who's on this show or on this podcast will by default get their own IMDb page as well. So anybody out there who's ever wanted an IMDb page and wants to be a podcast guest, reach out to me, let me know. Let's talk about something fun, and you'll get your own page, which is super cool. You can keep it basic and not do anything with it. Or if you check out my IMDb page, type in Jeff Seltzer. I'm apparently the second Jeff Seltzer. You'll see pictures of me. You'll see a link to my website. You'll see another podcast that I was on, the Major World Order, that I was on back in April. Some random trivia, also some cool stuff that I started adding in there. So try not to be too silly adding stuff to my page, but it's just fun to have. Really cool to check out. Wanted to mention, for those of you that aren't aware, this podcast is on pretty much all podcast platforms. We are on video and audio, both on Spotify, also on Apple, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Pandora, Good Pods, pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast. We are on all major podcast platforms. Please continue to like, follow, leave reviews. It's been a few weeks since we've gotten any good reviews. So please leave a review for the podcast at any of these locations. I'd love to read them. I'd love to read them on the show. Give you a shout out if you want. I'll get you some stickers as well if that helps out as well. That leads me to my guest for this week. So those of you that probably read the description of this podcast, the topic is Halloween Horror Nights. Now, a little fun games with numbers, I guess, here. So for those of you that are also aware, based on the description, this is episode 12 of the podcast. I've now been to Halloween Horror Nights 12 separate years. And the first year that I ever went to Halloween Horror Nights, or HHN, was 2012. So a lot of 12s there, which is just really, really random. Anyhow, with that said, I'm going to introduce my guest for this week, Jon Germain, who is not quite the expert that I am in Halloween Horror Nights, but he's gone to now as many as 2 different years of Halloween Horror Nights. Jon, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, of course. So real quick, before we get into Jon and Halloween Horror Nights, first of all, for those of you that aren't aware, all the graphics and images and a lot of the stuff that you'll see on the screen here, if you watch the video, or that I use via social media, was created by Jon. Jon's a very talented graphic designer, artist, communication, stuff like that. So firstly, Jon, thank you for all the work that you've done for the show. Really, really appreciate it.
Happy to help. It came out awesome, and it looks great every week.
Absolutely. It gives me a smile every time I see it, either on a hat that I'm wearing right now or on, social media, or even on IMDb now, where you've got your logo just up there. It's really, really cool. So thank you again, John.
Yeah, of course.
Perfect. So, John, with that said, I wanted to give you a brief opportunity to introduce yourself. To let us know, who is John?
Yeah, so I live in New Jersey. I am married, 15 years. I have three amazing kids. And I have been friends with you for, gosh, maybe 7, 8 years now.
About
Uh,
that.
Somehow you talked me into going to a haunted house, I guess. I want to say 2 years ago, because we went to the one in upstate New York, right?
Yes.
And that sort of led into our horror nights uh, the last 2 years that we've gone, actually. And I just want to be very upfront with everybody. I am terrified of haunted houses. So getting me into the situation is very funny and ironic at the same time.
Awesome. Well, John, first of all, thank you for sharing. Secondly, I'll say, I mean, much like the concept of this podcast, where for me, it's all about getting myself out of my comfort zone. I think I've done a really good job of getting you out of your comfort zone also with haunted houses the last few years, right? As you said, we went to upstate New York about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
You loved it so much that you went with me to Florida now 2 years in a row. Obviously a very different experience going to your local haunted house versus going to a Universal Studios haunted house, which, for me, I enjoy them all, right? Like I enjoy the local scare. It feels a little more real, I guess. Feels like something bad could potentially happen, but you don't think it really will happen. Versus going to Universal Studios, where you recognize it's owned by, Xfinity, Comcast, NBC, and nothing will happen, right? You're in a very safe place. And for the most part, it looks scary and you might kind of feel it, but for the most part, you don't really have any, fear that you're not going to make it out, right?
I mean, let's be honest. The one that we've gone to 2 years in a row in upstate New York is in the middle of a cornfield. So yes, it feels like it happened. It is very creepy.
Yes.
And yes, it's not owned by major conglomerates. So I could see something very bad happening, in fact.
Yes.
And yeah, it's super scary up there and super fun. And again, it was fun to delve into that. And I remember you telling me, over 2 years ago now, oh, this is great, but you one day you got to come with me to Halloween. And that was sort of the genesis of like, oh, that could be kind of fun, because you kept telling me like, yeah, this is neat, this is homegrown, this is interesting, but when you put some money behind it, as you see with Halloween Horror Nights and Universal, you can really build, a beast. And in fact, 10 beasts every year, right? 10 different houses, and
Yes.
each with their own personalities and customizations and different surprises. So when you see that, it can really be very, very interesting, because it just becomes this limitless way of scaring the heck out of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for sharing, John. Appreciate that. So for those of you that are, let's say, lesser aware about Halloween Horror Nights, so I think I mentioned earlier, maybe I didn't. Universal Studios, there are, I believe, 4 of them in the world, and each of them between September and October have a Halloween Horror Nights. For the most part, historically, they go about 5. They call IP versus 5 originals. So 5 IP would be intellectual property. So something based off of like a real movie or TV show. So in years past, they've had haunted houses for like Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, House of a Thousand Corpses, Ghostbusters, Stranger Things, stuff like that. So that's what you would consider to be IP, or things that they have to license. On the flip side, they oftentimes will have about half of the houses are original houses. So things that aren't necessarily real, but they make it, scary or goofy, or they do something to kind of like make it fun. So for example, this year, one of the houses, actually one of my favorite ones, that was an original house, was called Slaughter Cinema. So for those of you that aren't aware, back in like the 70s and 80s, at movie theaters, they'd often have something called Grindhouse. They made some remakes from a couple years ago, where basically it's like a real, I don't know, ridiculous looking horror movie that it feels like a throwback, right? It could be grainy feeling, but it's just kind of based on kind of nothing, right? So the Slaughter Cinema house that they ran, they basically had like 8 or 9 different like houses within a house. So each room had a different gimmick, had a different theme, and it was different than traditional haunted houses at Universal Studios. Basically, you didn't really walk through like a story or walk through like a world. Basically, you walked into a room, you saw something, walked into another room, you saw something else. So it was definitely interesting. What I'll say is historically as well, they've done a Slaughter Cinema in the past too, and sometimes they'll use them as a test to see which rooms are the best and then make a full house out of them. John, you didn't see Slaughter Cinema 1 a few years ago, but you did experience Slaughter Cinema 2 this year. How would you describe it, or kind of like what were your thoughts?
Like you said, it's a throwback, which is super fun. So you get that very authentic feeling of like a Chainsaw Massacre type movie from the 70s, right?
Yeah.
And they just do such a phenomenal job of, and all of the houses do it, of encompassing you into these areas, and you feel like you are involved in every aspect as you're walking. And for people who are sort of new to Halloween Horror Nights and or going through haunted houses, it probably takes about 3 minutes to go through one. Does that sound about right? Would you say 3 minutes on par?
That's about right. Yeah, I would agree with that.
So you are in a very confined space. It is very dark. There are different things coming at you, different scare characters, actors jumping out at you, different techniques, different special effects. So you are very enveloped in what's happening through that 3 minute process. And, for somebody like me who hasn't been, going to Halloween Horror Nights for well over a decade, it's terrifying. It's anxiety ridden. It's everything you can imagine if you're really, really scared. And again, I've never been one of those people who loves horror movies. I've certainly watched a lot more of them since I've been friends with you, and you've kind of given me different ones to look at, watch. And I'm a huge movie buff, so I'm always down for a great recommendation. But as you sort of delve deeper and deeper into these things, it's fun to be scared. Everybody loves to be scared a little bit. It's fun to watch, grown men and women crying to get out of these houses because they really do feel so authentic. So getting back to your initial point, yeah, you feel like you're in the middle of a Chainsaw Massacre-esque film with that particular house, and you're just through.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's funny you say that. So like for me, I mean, this is my 12th year that I went, and like at this point for me, it's kind of like I see things and I kind of laugh it off or I enjoy it or whatever, but I don't really have like a real fear to it. Now let's rewind back to 2012, 2013 when I first started going, and like for me, I was scared. Like even though I recognize like, hey, nothing bad can happen, like things are jumping out of different places. You don't see what's going on. You don't fully understand or recognize what's happening. So first couple of years, absolutely. So much so that I think it was like the Silent Hill house that I went to like in either 12 or 13 or whenever that was. I remember walking through the house and legitimately the lady in front of me, somebody jumped out at her. She fell, banged her head on the ground, and they had to carry her out. What I will say though is the scare actor did not break character, went back to his spot and just did it again to somebody else. Like for me, I was like, what is this? Like, what have I walked into?
They've seen everything at this point, especially throughout a season. So if you're a scare actor and you are doing, 50 to 60 days worth, and you've seen literally thousands of people, right? Coming through this. I'm sure they've seen everything, and you just go along with the program and go, all right, that was crazy. Next person coming up, I got to scare them.
Yeah, I mean, just to add that, I mean, for the record, the scare actors can't touch you and don't come too close to you. It's just one of those things where some people, who are, let's say, novices or new to the haunted houses, they don't know how to react, right? And they're scared, obviously. So something in the dark with weird noises jumps out at you, you jump, she probably slips and just banged her head or something. I mean, it's obviously not a great situation.
Natural human reaction.
Absolutely is. I mean, if you don't have that kind of reaction or that kind of instinct, you're probably, there could be something wrong with you, which makes me think maybe there's something wrong with me at this point. I'm not sure. But what I'll say is this too. So, first few years, definitely super scared the entire time I walked through it. I think what's helped me also through the years is something that Halloween Horror Nights also offers that you can buy as a separate thing that John and I did last year is something called Unmasking the Horror Tour. So at Halloween Horror Nights, they have 10 houses, right? So you can walk through them at night. It's dark, it's scary, that kind of stuff. You can do, again, the Unmasking the Horror Tour during the day, where legitimately you have a tour guide that walks you through about half the houses with the lights on and no scare actors. Now, for me, it did a couple of things. You can kind of see the details of the houses, right? So at night when you're walking through and it's dark and you're scared, you're not necessarily picking up all the different things. Like lots of Easter eggs, the art is amazing, right? Some of these houses you walk through, like you really don't get a great chance to appreciate them at night. So like the Ghostbusters
You're
house.
going quickly, so you a lot of the time you miss the detail, and the detail is phenomenal.
Yeah, the Ghostbusters house, like in years past, the Stranger Things house, like things that like when you're walking through it, you don't see, but with the lights on, you see it, which is fantastic.
Right.
Number two, the tour guide for Unmasking the Horror does a great job of kind of giving you a little more background. So we did, and I'll get into it in a few minutes, something called an RIP tour, where a tour guide walks you to each house, gives you a little backstory, but you don't necessarily get the story through the house as you're seeing each detail. With the Unmasking the Horror tour, the tour guide is walking you room by room. You stop, you can take pictures in some of the houses, and they'll kind of talk you through, here's what's going on here, here's how they created that. This is similar to a previous house years ago, things like that. So they can kind of talk to stuff like that. Now, lastly, what I was going to say with the Unmasking the Horror tour, which I think is probably what desensitized me to these houses, is when you're walking through them with the light on during the day, you can see where the scare actors are going to jump out of, right? So you can kind of get a sense of what kinds of things they do, what kind of strategies they have, and kind of where they hide, things like that. So then when I do go through the house at night, I'm more aware of what's going to happen. I'm looking for certain things, certain clues. I know what doors or what types of places are going to hide behind. I've done Unmasking the Horror tours probably about 4 or 5 times. I know John and I did one last year. We didn't do it this year. What were your thoughts on the tour last year? And did you miss it or did you not miss it this year?
Great question. I loved it last year because we did the RIP tour where we went through all 10 houses in a night, which again, if you ever have the opportunity, it's a couple extra bucks, but super fun, and you get to cut all the lines, which nothing better than that.
Of course.
Some of those lines can go 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, some of them 2 hours, especially as Jeff said, for some of the bigger IPs. I remember last year with The Last of Us, 2-hour lines, no problem. It was great. So if you do the RIP tour, you get to skip lines, which is always great, and you get to see all 10 houses in a single night within like a 4 to 5 hour period.
Yep.
Phenomenal, amazing, it's worth every dollar. I loved the Unmasking tour last year because we went through the RIP tour. I was scared to death, all 10 houses, every single one. Like couldn't believe how afraid I was. And then the next day we did it where they had the lights on, and you're like, oh, that's just plywood. Oh, those are just curtains. Oh, that's just lighting. So to see them use all the special effects is really, really neat because you're seeing them break down these houses. And I know the tour guide last year was talking about one of their designers who's like this wonderkind young guy. I think he's in his 20s, and he like draws out I guess he does 1 or 2 houses a year. He draws out the plans of his houses. So to get to see how he did this, and he's like, I want somebody here to scare you. I want this to have this piece. I want this to have this piece, was really, really interesting because you're watching this very complex process, which and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but the planning into these houses is almost about a year, right?
Yeah, it's actually, of what I've read or heard, it could be over a year. So the way the season generally goes is Halloween Horror Nights opens up late August. Those houses begin production sometime in early that year. So for the most part, Horror Nights ends in October, November, and almost immediately they break down this year's houses, and very soon after they start building the next year's houses. But with that said, from pre-production perspective, as it is, we're sitting right now in late September, I get the sense they already have at least half of next year's houses kind of pre-produced and at least, aligned to, right? They have to talk to different movie studios. They have to internally figure things out. These things are multi-million-dollar houses. The amount of investment they put into each house is ridiculous. If you go in and see some of the facades they have, it looks like a legitimate house or building and such, which blows me away that they do it so great. It looks awesome. And come November, okay, great, let's knock it down now,
It's crazy to think about it that way, because I remember last year with the Stranger Things house, you walk in and you're in the middle of a neighborhood, and you walk into that house as if it were a real house, and you're going through the house, and there's rooms that feel very similar to the way that if you watch Stranger Things, which I do with my daughter.
Yes.
So you're living it. You're again, I use that word, enveloped in it, because you just feel like you're right in the middle of it, and it feels so authentic. And even if you're not a horror fan, just to get that feeling of feeling like you're in a movie is pretty surreal and really, really neat. And again, with some of the less scary houses, I think this year we could agree the Ghostbusters house was more fun and goofy than terrifying. Whereas something like the Insidious house this year was a lot scarier and probably the scariest of all the houses.
Right.
So you're kind of working with those parallels, which is really interesting in my mind too. Like, it's not 100%, scare the heck out of you, 10 houses for, 30 straight minutes. It's, oh, this is really neat. This is cool. That's really funny. Oh, what an interesting way to do that. And then again, going back to, the Lights on tour, seeing, these, I don't even know what you want to call them, but like, I want to say dummies, but they're not dummies, but like figures on the ground that are playing characters, or animatronics, or, all the different stuff they use. Cause God, they use so many, props. When you see them on the ground, it feels less frightening because all of a sudden lights are on, they're not moving, they're not doing this. And it's so interesting to see it from that perspective, just because the effects are so neat, and you see the time and the love that the creators put into these things, because they have to be the biggest fans of all, to come up with these insane contraptions and creations and characters. It makes you wonder, if they're having nightmares every night thinking about all these crazy things. Some of the stuff they threw at us last year, especially last year, was really scary. Some of the things they threw at you, you were just like, who's sick enough to think of some of this stuff? Which is fun.
Yeah. So to your point, you mentioned a couple of the houses that were scarier and whatever else like that. I'll say this is my personal view. So as I mentioned before, usually they have about half IP and half original. This year, they had 3 IP and 7 original. Me personally, I prefer the IP or the intellectual property houses because it's easier for me to get psyched up and like excited for them, right? Agreed. So Stranger Things, Last of Us, things like that. Like, I've watched the shows, I've watched the movies, things like that. So I know what to expect. So I'm not spending half the house trying to kind of get myself into the mindset of what am I in.
Yeah, but what's the theme? What am I looking for? Right.
Yeah, the moment I walk into it, I'm like, okay, this is The Last of Us. This is fantastic. It's not living through, or
totally,
or Us, or House of a Thousand Corpses, or some of the other favorite houses I've had in the past. Like, I'm right away into it, and I could watch the movie even on like the flight on the way down to get myself hyped for it. Sure. Versus original houses years ago, from a history perspective. So years ago, when I first started going, they would have a video playing outside each house to kind of give you a little intro of what to expect. Again, this was actually an IP about like The Walking Dead back in like 2012. I hadn't started watching this TV show yet, but they had like huge screens showing like, what do you expect? What is The Walking Dead about? And that got me super hyped for the house before I walked into it. Thought it was amazing, went home and binged like the first 2 seasons of The Walking Dead. On the flip side, the original houses, like nowadays, you walk into it, you're trying to figure it out. There are some scary parts, but sometimes if you don't necessarily know the story, understand what you're walking into, it just doesn't necessarily, for me anyway, land the same way that an IP would hit.
Sure. I totally agree. And it's that age-old thing of when you're with your significant other or your family or your whatever it may be, and somebody goes, let's watch a new movie, and you kind of go, how about we watch this, which we've seen 1,000 times.
Sure.
You love that comfort, right? Everybody loves comfort.
Yes, it's the risk when you watch a movie you haven't seen before, right? Like,
I might not like that.
I've had days where I with streaming, you've got so many different options.
Totally.
It was a few months ago, I put on, I think, 3 or 4 different movies in a day, and I didn't like any of them. So I eventually went to watch like Office Space or American Pie or something, movies that are classics that I've watched 100 times,
And I think with that, you're going into a house and you go, I know all these characters. I know how all these people react and do. I know this room because I've seen this room. I know the theme of this. I know the ending of this. To sort of have those little footnotes is fun. It's almost like you're in on the spoiler, right? You kind of know what's going to go. And that's the fun thing about when they did Stranger Things last year, because thematically they went through like 5, 6, 7 episodes of that season, which must have been season, I'm going to say 4 or 5. So you're watching that thematic process, which is really fun. And again, I've watched Stranger Things with my wife and daughter, so I was very familiar, which is great. I've watched The Last of Us with my wife, so I was so excited for that house. and to see them doing things that were from both the video game and the television show was really, really neat, because they, again, when you have a budget of that size, you can kind of do whatever the heck you want. So to get to watch them do that, it was really neat. I mean, they had, cop cars just laying with zombies walking all over them. It was really over the top, and it just was a fun way for a fan to come in and go, oh my God, I'm in this world. I don't think for a second that I am not in this world. I feel like a zombie is going to come get me. I feel like the police are shooting behind me. It was really interesting. And they really threw you in there. I'm trying to think of what the other IP was last year that I really loved. Do you remember, besides Stranger Things and The Last of Us? Chucky.
That's right. They had Chucky. Was that part of the Blumhouse house, or was that something different?
Which one?
Was that part of the Blumhouse house?
I don't remember, but Chucky was really good.
It was really cool. So for those of you that aren't aware, so Chucky from Child's Play, which was a movie back in the 80s and 90s, and then more recently a TV series on USA Network. They had a house based on the recent TV series, and to John's point, you walk in the house and there are Chuckies everywhere, all size Chuckies, all looks of Chuckies. If you ever wanted to be afraid of a doll, like, this was the time to do it, because they were everywhere. Chuckies with knives, Chuckies hanging from the ceiling. It was pretty insane.
The authentic nature of a doll running after you was felt immediately.
And what was great was, I think the Chucky house was one of the Unmasking the Horror Tour houses that we went on during the day as well. So we got to see it at night, and then we got to go during the day with the lights on, and you see Chuckies everywhere. Like, as scary as it is at night in the dark, when you're actually looking straight ahead and you're seeing that you're surrounded by Chuckies, like, that was pretty freaky.
It was great. And it just, again, I use the word over and over again when I explain these things. It was terrifying. You felt like in the middle of a bad Child's Play, Child's Play 7, and you're getting by this little guy, and he's going to just tear you to pieces. And, he's laughing at you and mocking you, and you're like, this feels very real.
So one thing to add also, so as mentioned before, this year and last few years, they've had 10 different haunted houses. Additionally, Halloween Horror Nights has 5 what they call scare zones. So they have the sections within the park that are themed to a certain movie, TV series, or original. So in years past, which was really cool, like years ago, they had 5 different scare zones, all themed after The Walking Dead, where basically all 5 scare zones, you walk in it, like, you feel like you're in a TV series. They've had scare zones for The Purge. They've had scare zones for lots of different things. This year, as always, they had 5 scare zones, but I'll say the one scare zone that jumped out the most to me was the Blumhouse scare zone. So for those of you that aren't aware, Blumhouse is a production studio that is somehow loosely associated with Universal Studios, which is obviously where this park is at. Blumhouse has been responsible for Freaky, Happy Death Day, the recent movie Megan, a bunch of stuff like that. So actually, Black Phone, which was in theaters a couple of years ago. And I think last year or 2 years ago, they had a Black Phone house, which was amazing. So this year they had a Blumhouse scare zone, which was a little less scary, but more photo op-y, which, as John will tell you, I love my selfie and I love my photo ops. Where I was able to get a photo with Megan. She looked just like Megan from the movie. A photo with the dude from Black Phone, which, again, obviously was not Ethan Hawke, but it was a guy in the Black Phone mask, which was crazy. Like, stuff like that. They had a guy from The Purge. Again, not real actors from the movie, but scare actors that look a lot like that. Definitely makes it a little more surreal at night, I guess, when it's dark and it's cloudy, or it's steamy, whatever else like that. You're walking through and you really can't see much, and all of a sudden a scare actor jumps out at you from the darkness. You flinch. I mean, as much as I don't usually jump or flinch in the houses, there were times where I was like walking through a scare zone talking to John, and all of a sudden out of nowhere someone comes out right in my face, and I definitely flinch. Like, it's legit.
It's human nature.
It's just a natural reflex, right?
Of course. And yeah, so the scare zones are really fun. I thought this year was interesting and fun. I thought last year was really, really good.
Yeah.
It was based around like a music festival in the vein of Woodstock in like the 60s or 70s, let's say.
Right.
All of a sudden, there's a vampire outbreak at this music festival, and everybody's getting bitten and they're becoming vampires and they're coming for you. So again, you're just getting thrown into this thing, and every time you walk through the parks, you're just getting these vampires coming at you, and they're just hissing in your face. And it's really, really fun because you don't know when it's coming. You're in the dark, so you don't know sort of who is a scare actor and who's not, because people are dressed up in their outfits. And so it just could kind of come at you at any time. And when you do get scared and you kind of do that jump back, it's funny. When a friend does it, it's even funnier. So to get to be sort of in the mix and you're sort of the entertainment for them is super fun.
Yeah.
I loved it last year. I thought this year was just okay.
I would agree. I would agree. I mean, this year, again, I thought Blumhouse Scare Zone was cool, but it wasn't like a scary scare zone. Like in years past, I've definitely seen much, much scarier. Blumhouse was cool from a photo op perspective. It was neat to see. The other four scare zones really didn't do, let's say, that much for me. Some of them you had to kind of like read up or try to figure out what they were. So like the gimmicks or kind of the actual scare zone wasn't as, let's say, self-explanatory as you'd like them to be. So again, it is what it is. They all can't be home runs, but for me, even in a bad year or let's say a less than average year for Halloween Horror Nights, scare zone houses, whatever, definitely still a lot of fun for me. Just getting away, experiencing it, living it, doing multiple nights, doing it different ways. It's just a fun couple nights out and just new experiences.
And that's what it is, right? It's just going out, hanging out with your friends and doing, this thing that feels very theatrical and over the top and just enjoyable. And again, I always go back to, I don't know if I ever was in a quote unquote haunted house besides maybe the Haunted Mansion at Disney, which I would not count. It feels very, Halloween Horror is light. Because as I tell people this when they're like, wait, what did you do? And I go, I went to horror house, a haunted house, a set of them, 10 of them.
Yeah.
And they don't always get it at first. And I'm like, it's terrifying. And they're like, oh, can kids go? And I'm like, they shouldn't. It's like my daughter has asked me 2 years in a row. She goes, oh my God, I want to go to Universal. She's 13. I want to go to Universal again with you. And I'm like, you can't, because you'll be terrified. You'll be running out of these houses. You would not be able to handle it. If her 40-something-year-old father cannot handle it, nor can she. So she keeps begging me, and I'm just like, it's not appropriate. And you and I even saw like little kids there, not in the houses, but like walking around, and I was like, ugh, that feels like a lot for a little kid, just seeing these, zombies walking around. And what was this year's theme? Medieval people with knives in their heads and all this kind of crazy stuff, right? So going to, I had never really done haunted houses before, and now I am very much ingrained in it, and I think it's fun and I love it, and it's crazy. And I think maybe I'm a little less scared and jumpy than I used to be. This year I didn't jump nearly as much as last year, so maybe I'm just getting to be like you and becoming desensitized towards getting jumped out at.
It's very possible. I mean, to your point, like for years I've been seeing, some parents bring little kids. For me, my kids are 16 and 14. When they were much younger is when I started going to this, and like I never even thought about bringing them, right? Like just seeing people pushing strollers with babies through the scare zones. Like I started thinking like, hey, is that going to cost therapy when the kid's older? I don't know. I guess different parents sort kids their own way. Who am I to judge? Kind of is what it is. All I can say is for me, I mean, not everyone's wired for or built for it, but if they're having a good time, their kids are having a good time, then, good for them. Very happy for them.
Whereas when we were talking to our guide this year, I thought it was really interesting because he told me that when we were sort of taking a break between houses, I said, oh, do you get a lot of kids on these tours? Just because I had seen some kids in the scare zones and they were much younger than, 4, 5, 6. But I said, do you get, younger kids to come into the houses? And he's like, absolutely. There's kids who are 9 who jump in there and they think it's the greatest thing ever. They go through all 10 houses. They love it. And they couldn't be more excited. And then he's like, there's the flip side of that where, parents pay a lot of money to send their kids through the houses. We take the tour, the rep tour, which is a couple extra bucks to walk through all of them without having to wait. And he's like, by the first house, the kid is done.
Right.
10, 11 years old. They're done. They can't handle it. They got to get out of there. So it's all about, what kind of kid you have, right? Some kids absolutely love this and they're totally fine. And I know some adults who are in their 40s who are like, I was talking to a friend today she was telling me, she's like, I could never do that. I would be too scared. My heart would be jumping. I would drop dead of a heart attack.
Right.
So it's all about sort of, is this something you like or not? And if you really, really like it, Halloween Horror Nights is the premiere. You got to go to it. It's super fun. It's you see the time, the creativity, the investment, the money, everything is put in there, right? You have these 10 are just phenomenal.
Yeah.
But if it's not for you, go hang out on the rides because you're not going to enjoy it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, for me, I would never like force or even really pressure someone to go with me, because I'm like, if they're going into it and they're not excited at the beginning, it's going to be a bad time for everybody involved, right? Like, I'm not going to have a good time. It's not going to be anxious and scared for the other person. The other person's not going to be happy, so it's not the way it's going to be. My friends Chelsea and Jay, who live down in Florida, in the Orlando area, for years, Jay absolutely loves Halloween Horror Nights. Chelsea doesn't like it so much. So what'll generally happen when they do go to the houses is he'll go to Halloween Horror Nights. Sometimes she'll go to Diagon Alley for Harry Potter or Islands of Adventure or something like that, just because she's not as into Halloween Horror Nights as he is. So again, it works for them. Super happy for them. Again, for me, I would never force anyone or pressure someone to, just because, again, it's not for everybody, as John had said.
And
go ahead.
Just because I know Jay and Chelsea, the level of anxiety as you're going through that, as you're waiting on houses, going through houses, waiting on houses, the anxiety's building the entire time. So it kind of gets to you a little bit. And I would think if you're not really, really into it, by like house 2, your nerves are kind of shot.
Yes.
So you probably don't want to go to house 3.
No.
Let alone house 10. So I totally get it.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to mention was, so earlier we mentioned the RIP tour. So there are multiple ways to, I guess, experience Halloween Horror Nights. So the least expensive way is the basic ticket. So you buy a ticket, you go in, and you wait in each line. Now, what I'll say is, being that I live in New Jersey and I come down for a couple days a year, I want to make sure I experience every house as much as I can. First couple of years, I started going down there back in 2012. I went for one night, went to Halloween Horror Nights. I'd be lucky if I hit 4 or 5 houses tops. So I definitely left a lot of houses on the table. The next level up they offer is something called Express, which is pretty much as it sounds. It works like a fast pass or a lightning lane or whatever for Halloween Horror Nights. So you still have to buy the basic ticket to get in. But if you get the Express, you basically get to go on the shorter lines. Still not guaranteed to go through every house if it's a crowded night, but you'll probably cut your line times in half to about a third, which is still pretty good. The third way, which is by far the best, but also the most expensive way to do it, is what John referred to before as the RIP tour, which is their play on a VIP tour, right? So it's the RIP tour. You still have to buy your ticket to the park. You do not have to buy an express pass, but it's kind of a more premium experience. So you get in, they take you into Cafe La Bamba, which has a bunch of catered food and non-alcoholic drinks or alcoholic drinks to purchase. You get a tour guide who then walks you basically to the front of the line for each house. He gives you a little backstory in each house. You experience it. You could do all 10 houses in the night. He also takes you through all 5 scare zones, as well as the show, which we didn't mention before, but you get fantastic seats for the show, which is awesome. It's usually like a music, dance, some kind of like, next level, like either scary or magic, whatever show. Really cool. They've been doing it for years. Last couple of years, they've had one theme where it's kind of like a fantasy dream sequence. Before that was the Academy of Villains, which was awesome. It was a great dance troupe, which is no longer together for reasons. And before that, they always had the Bill and Ted's show, which was based off of the old Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure movies, which was amazing, right? Basically, it was 30 minutes of them where they're kind of making fun of pop culture, Disney, and stuff like that. So you get into the show that they have there as well. That's something where in 5 hours, you get to hit all 10 houses, all 5 scare zones, and the show. Plus, you get some food. Again, super pricey. But it's the only way that if you're only down for a night, you get to experience everything about it. I often joke that, in retirement or years from now, my plan is to live down in the Orlando area. At which point, I think my Halloween Horror Nights experiences will probably be a little different than they are today, right? So right now, I go down for a couple of days a year, so I have to experience as much as I can over that short amount of time. When I live in the area, I kind of foresee a time where I can kind of, get a Halloween Horror Nights season ticket, as they sell, like the Rush of Fear, I think it's called. And if I want to go like to 2 houses a night or just kind of hang out with some friends, get a couple of drinks, that's cool because I don't have to experience everything all at once versus now I do. And that way, over the course of the 2 months for the full season, I do everything. If there's houses I like, I hit them more. If there's a house I don't like, I don't go back again. but it's a very different way experience. It's more of a hang as opposed to a get through every house, experience whatever I can.
And the
Sorry.
other to that is there's a lot of walking.
True.
You're going through a lot of houses, and it's a ton of walking. And if you're doing several nights in a row, it gets to be a lot, right?
Yeah.
So as we get older, you and I definitely think this year we felt it a little bit in our backs and our legs as we were just trying to get through every house. It's a lot. That being said, totally worth it. And again, why I'm such a big fan of the RIP tour. Again, it's pricey, but worth every dime just because you are getting to see things so quickly and you're not waiting on these lines for a really, really long time. And again, for folks like us who are, traveling all the way down to Florida and or Los Angeles to see these houses, it cuts that in half, right? So that we can kind of see everything in an expedited way, which is always wonderful. But yeah, going back to it, holy cow, lots of walking just because you're going through so many different houses and walking around the park multiple times. It's a heck of a lot.
Yeah, it's a great call out. I mean, I think I mentioned earlier, today is, or when this podcast drops, will be my 47th birthday. I've been doing this for 12 years now, or 13 years. So I was, 33, 34 when I first started. Halloween Horror Nights definitely hits differently at 46, 47 than it did in my early 30s.
I'm sure.
Taking 25, 30,000 steps, over the course of 6 hours, years ago, obviously wasn't pleasant, but was a little easier physically. At this point, I mean, you saw, by the end of the nights, we were holding our lower backs. We were, having some Advil cocktails, stuff like that. It was definitely experience that was kind of tough to come back from. And with that said, when I get older and retire and live in the Florida area, I don't know that I'll physically be able to do 10 houses a night because, when I'm in my, say, late 50s, early 60s, who knows what condition Jeff Seltzer will be in, right? So we'll see what happens. Maybe pacing myself is the way to go. So all we can do is plan ahead, hope for the best, and experience it as we need to, as we adapt and evolve, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what it's all about. And I was so proud of you this year because I know last year we went really hard in just 3 days where we did the tour, we did the RIP tour and then we did the Lights On tour and then we did a couple of houses, ad hoc. And this year when you were done. And I was shocked because you went, I got it. We did it. I got to see all of them. And you were like, I'm tired. I want to go home.
I'm a crusty old man in my late 40s at this point, I guess. I mean, that's part of it also. But I mean, I would say to add to that, and I'll probably talk about it in a future pod as well, was part of the trip was Universal Halloween Horror Nights, but we also did a lot of Disney World during the week as well. So I recognize it's, figuratively a marathon, not a sprint. And I wanted to make sure that we still felt good and felt healthy the rest of the week. So I was like, you know what? We did all the houses. We did all I wanted to. We could probably use some sleep. I think I'm okay. So I'm, kind of learning what my limits are and kind of how to adapt and adjust to it.
And that's a good thing, right? Because as you said, as we get older and our backs hurt and our legs stuff, we can't just keep going and going and going until we, drop. It's not fun, right? So to be paced and to be able to do what we want when we feel like doing it, that makes it all the more fun. There's no reason to torture ourselves.
Yeah, again, I mean, I have my Apple Watch on at all times. I do an average about 8,000 steps a day on an average day. Again, we were doing 20 to 30,000 steps a day, right? That's a huge ask of your body when your body's kind of like, dude, you're not eating well, you're not drinking well, and you're also, tripling your steps. Like, what are we doing here? Like, what is going on? So, I'm trying to make sure that I understand that I want to experience everything. I want to experience it the right way. And so just pacing myself as I need to.
The body breakdown is very real. So I'm glad we were able to pace ourselves and enjoy everything thoroughly, especially in that hot Florida weather, because holy cow, it was really, really hot this year, especially. So that part drains you too. Just the next day we waited on a couple houses just because we had done the RIP tour the day before, and then this time we did we do 3 houses separately? I think
we did 2 or 3 houses that second night, but we also kind of walked around. Had some food, whatever else like that. But again, I think that second night, what did we do? We were going to go to Universal during the day. We ended up just kind of adjusting, and where'd we go? We did something else that day. We slept in, I remember, because the night before we got in at 2 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the other thing. The RIP tour ended at like 1:30 in the morning, which again for us old men was was very late. Um,
Yes.
yeah, that was pretty crazy. But yeah, the next day I think we woke up late, and then we had to figure out what our next plan of attack was, and because certainly we weren't going to go wait on all 10 houses, because that is not feasible, especially with the time given. Because when does Halloween Horror Nights start?
Like 6 o'clock, I believe, something like that.
So
Yeah.
you'd really never be able to, if you were waiting online for every single house, you could never do it in a night without the RIP tour. You'd have to kind of split it over 2 or 3 nights. But yeah, I was proud of us as a team that we were able to say, hey, that was a lot. Let's move on and try something else the next day.
Absolutely. Cool. So with that said, John, we've gone through a lot. I appreciate and enjoy the experience. And again, thanks for the second year in a row for joining me for Halloween Horror Nights. Anything else you'd like to add before we call it and to an end for this week?
No, just thank you for bringing me into this world. I've had a ton of fun the last 2 years with Halloween Horror Nights. I am a massive fan now. As you know, I asked you during the summer if we have any if we know what themes there are for the houses. Right. And you always give me the hints of what you've heard, which is always fun. And that sort of builds the excitement. So now you've kind of you've piqued my interest that I can't go back now. So I'm excited to run it back next year and the year after that. We've had a ton of fun, and it's always a good time.
Very cool. Well, with that said, John, again, thank you for joining both on the trip as well as on this podcast. Want to thank all the listeners and all the viewers for sticking with me on this journey. Really appreciate it. I've learned a lot, and I'm really enjoying everyone sharing their stories, me sharing my stories. A couple of weeks ago, when I had a solo podcast, really enjoyed that a lot. I'll probably do another solo podcast in the coming weeks. We have some fun guests coming up the next few weeks. I have somebody who used to work for WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment, which I guess, considering the Netflix documentary that came out this week, should be an interesting conversation. Additionally, Megan Fernandez, who joined me in episode 2 to talk Disney World. She's going to be coming on to speak about Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween. So while John and I were both in Florida, we did Halloween Horror Nights for the scary, spooky stuff. We also went to Disney World for Not So Scary Halloween, had some really cool experiences there. So again, lots of cool stuff coming up. Please join us. Let us know what you think. Check us out on Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. DM us, comments, likes, all the fun stuff. Remember, my personal Instagram is Seltzer77 for all things Jeff Seltzer. You can find me over at jeffseltzer.com. And don't forget, as always, you can email the show at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. You want to be a sponsor, you want to give me some money, you want to make fun of my hat, whatever you want to do, here I am. Send me an email. With that said, thank you all so much for joining, and we will see you all next week. Take care.